Hey, I'm back. I think we had some tech issues. Go figure. Every time we talk about touchy subjects, there's the undue influences we have from the censorship lords above us. So anyway, hopefully you guys can hear me, and I'm back into that live stream now. So what we were talking about breast cancer and the numbers, right? So 1 in 8 these are U.S. statistics, but 1 in 8 are going to end up with this diagnosis. That's 3.8 million diagnoses each year that we see in the realm of breast cancer. So it's a very prevalent disease. It's very dangerous and lead to the demise, right? It can lead to death. And so obviously we want to do things to prevent it. And so there's a really good book. I usually don't recommend books, but there's a really good book written by an MD PhD researcher. And I really truly believe this should be dedicated reading to all women. It's called Overdiagnosed, and it's a book on breast cancer and how the condition itself, how we overtest, and how it's overdiagnosed. And a lot of times the early detection actually doesn't allow for your body to actually deal with cancer. Remember, we all have cancer. You've got cancer cells floating through you right now. And your body's natural immune system has mechanisms to deal with cancer cells. And so sometimes when we have early diagnosis or early detection methods, this actually plays against people. And that's what this book is all about. This book, Overdiagnosed, is about. It's about how early detection can actually lead to treatment, and the treatment combined with the stress of the diagnosis actually leads to worse outcomes. And I think it's, like I said, I think it's super important that you all read this and understand the science and the actual research about early detection, because so many doctors will tell you that it's so important to have early detection, to catch it early. But I would argue that early detection doesn't allow your own immune system to effectively deal with cancer cells, because again, we're strong enough, our bodies are strong enough. And so a minor abnormality on something like a mammogram that could detect something early might not necessarily be a doomsday diagnosis. And if you read this text, again, written by MD PhD researcher, I think you'll have a much better grasp and understanding of how early detection is maybe not your best friend. The other thing that we could consider here is that the mammogram itself provides massive quantities of radiation, and in part that radiation that you're being exposed to is a contributing factor. It's one of the many environmental contributing factors to cancer, not just breast cancer, but in this case, yes, breast cancer. That radiation exposure to the breast tissue increases the risk for developing later cancer. So I know some women, because of their family history, are going in every few years having their breasts radiated in the effort to try to early detect and be cautious, but what they're actually doing is they're adding that radiation that can contribute to the illness directly. And that's not necessarily a good thing. It can actually lend to be a very bad thing. Now, one of the questions comes up a lot to me, which is, Dr. Osborne, you're an expert in gluten sensitivity. Is there a connection between gluten and breast cancer? And the simple answer is there have been no research studies to date that directly link, okay, the keyword directly linking gluten sensitivity or celiac disease to breast cancer. But that doesn't mean there aren't indirect relationships that could be at play. And we're going to talk about some of those indirect relationships tonight. What we do know about gluten is it causes, from a research perspective, we do have links to gluten and 11 types of cancer. 11 different types of cancer that we're 100% sure gluten can either cause or contribute to. And those are listed here: oral cancers, thyroid cancers, throat, esophageal, liver, stomach, intestinal lymphomas, pancreatic cancer, skin cancer, rectal cancer, colon cancer. So those we know gluten can cause. To me, in my mind, it's not a far off thing to say there could be a possible relationship between gluten and breast cancer directly. And one of the reasons why is that gluten distracts. If you're reacting to gluten, it distracts your immune system from doing its job, right? If your immune system is constantly battling gluten, trying to neutralize gluten, then its resources for battling normal natural things are diminished. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much evidence on gluten and cancer. It's actually, from a food perspective, it's one of the most well-studied food-inducing cancers outside of, we could say, sugar, very highly linked to cancer as well. But gluten, very well studied in that regard. There's just no direct studies linking it to breast cancer. But again, the common logic would say, okay, gluten, if it's distracting the immune system and depleting immune system resources, it can allow for the proliferation or potentiate the proliferation of cancers, including breast cancer. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, because many of you are gluten sensitive that watch the show. Now, one of the things that we absolutely are sure of as well is that gluten induces nutritional deficits, and many of these nutritional deficiencies that gluten can contribute to are linked to cancer. And this is more, instead of a causal relationship, it's more of an indirect relationship, because again, gluten can cause nutritional deficiencies. Now, many things can cause nutritional deficiencies: poor diet, highly processed food, overconsumption of alcohol, overutilization of certain prescription medications. These are all things that can cause nutrient deficiencies, but these deficiencies specifically have been studied with a correlation and relationship to the development of breast cancer. So we're certain. I mean, magnesium, one of the impacts here is it can lead to hormonal dysfunction and disruption that can put the odds in favor of the development of cancers, including breast cancer. We know that magnesium as well, one of its functions is it regulates blood sugar, and it regulates how well you break sugar down into energy. And if you don't have adequate quantities, one of the things that we know is sugar feeds cancer. This should not be a mystery. If you're new, even if you're new to this show, this should not be a mystery. We've known that for years. This is why it's so disgusting to me when you go to these cancer walkathons or marathons, and you've got you've got the booths there, and everybody's donating money and time to do this. But what are they selling at these booths to raise the money? They're selling Coke, right, and cookies and donuts. It's just absolutely disgusting. If you're ever at one of these cancer walks and this is what they're throwing at you, I would just encourage any of you that are there at those walks to really raise hell. Let them know it's not okay to say you're fighting cancer while you're selling things to promote cancer. To me, it's an oxymoron. It's out of control at this point, and we know sugar's bad for us. So again, anyway, I'll get off that rant. We're talking about magnesium as being a regulator of blood sugar, magnesium being a regulator of hormone balance, including estrogen. And so very, very important. If the body gets adequate magnesium in the relationship to the development of cancer, we also know that vitamin A has what's known as anti-cancer impact, right? One of the things that vitamin A is very effective at doing is it's effective at a process called apoptosis. So it helps your cells understand how to kill cancer cells. That's what apoptosis is. It's where it's programming inside your DNA, but it's driven by vitamin A, and it's also driven by vitamin D. So the two of these, so it's vitamin A and vitamin D, play a role in allowing your cells to understand how to neutralize or kill cancer cells. And so deficiencies of vitamin A and vitamin D also linked to cancer. We also know vitamin C has its potent ability to scavenge or to pick up on free radicals and neutralize them. So we call that antioxidant capacity, right? It's a very potent antioxidant. It also binds a number of different toxins. Vitamin C plays a role in hormone balance and hormone production, especially your stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline. We also know that zinc, is an antioxidant. A lot of these things are antioxidants. Selenium is an antioxidant. Vitamin D is an antioxidant, etc. So we've got a lot of antioxidant capacity within these nutrients, but zinc also plays a role, just like magnesium I mentioned earlier, in blood sugar regulation and insulin. Zinc is the center of insulin. So it helps your body produce insulin, and it makes that insulin work properly. And if you don't have adequate zinc, it's very, very difficult to control blood sugar, which makes it, again, sugar feeds cancer. So very, very important nutrient as it relates to that. And then we also have the B vitamins, and these are super critical for proper metabolism of estrogens. So this is where we get into estrogen. We'll talk a little bit about that. Let's make some room here. The metabolism of estrogen. So, estrogen is not one thing. Estrogen is multiple hormones. We don't just make one estrogen, it's just estrogen. We make estradiol, we make estrone, we make estriol. There's also different versions of estrogen that are hydroxylated or methylated versions of estrogen. So some of these versions of estrogen, though, are more carcinogenic or more cancer-inducing than others. So when our body produces estrogen, in different types of estrogens, it goes through a pathway. Estrogens go through a pathway of breakdown. And some of these estrogens, if you're deficient in B vitamins, if you're deficient in magnesium, then this breakdown is inhibited with, and so the estrogens that you form are more cancer-inducing types of estrogens. And so we're certain that B vitamins play a role in this, especially vitamin B12 and folate and vitamin B6 play a major role in methylating estrogen so that your body, again, can get rid of the cancer component or the cancer-inducing aspect of estrogen. We're also certain that magnesium plays a similar role, again, in helping to break down these estrogens into non-carcinogenic varieties so that your body has less of an opportunity at developing it. There were a number of years ago, there was a major study, the Health Women's Initiative study, I think it was 2002, somewhere in that neighborhood, where this study where they stopped, so what they were doing was trying to determine the risk of estrogen in terms of cancer. And when I say the risk of estrogen, I'm not talking about natural estrogen production as much as I'm talking about estrogen given from prescription medications. And so certain kinds of estrogen, so like in your birth control pills as an example, a lot of women out there taking birth control pills, and so a lot of those pills contain synthetic estrogen, not natural, but synthetic estrogens, and they also contain synthetic progestins or progesterone. And so these taken synthetically, that this study showed that it increased the risk for the development of cancer to a huge degree. As a matter of fact, they had to end this study early because the result was so prevalently positive for the risk of cancer. Now, I think it was not very long ago, scientists went back and reanalyzed that study, and they found that it had less to do with the actual estrogen, and it had more to do with the synthetic progesterone. This is not common knowledge. A lot of doctors still really hammer estrogen as the major contributing factor, and it's not that it can't be. I would say that, birth control pills not a good idea. Not the synthetic varieties of these birth control pills. They can be very dangerous, and they have very aggressive long-term side effects. Aside from the fact they can deplete magnesium and B vitamins, they can increase your risk for stroke. They can increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. But again, it's synthetic because there's this whole field of science that's breaking out around hormones and estrogens and progesterones, and you've probably heard the term bioidentical. And so these are basically these hormones are not synthetic. They are very, very much like the estrogens and progesterones that your body would naturally produce. And I haven't seen any convincing research that shows that bioidentical hormone replacement therapy increases the risk for this type of cancer. So again, this is if you're looking at family history of breast cancer and you're not sure, the best thing that you can do is work with your doctor and talk with your doctor, but work with somebody who understands this, because if you're working with somebody who doesn't understand that, they're probably just going to tell you to avoid any type of hormones, and that may not be the case. So again, I know some women, they even with a history of breast cancer, actually go on bioidentical estrogens, and if they have a doctor who understands estrogen metabolism, they can be monitored. Those individuals can be monitored to make sure they're not producing certain types of estrogen that are known for activating certain estrogen receptors that increase the risk for developing cancer. So my point in saying all that is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Are synthetics maybe not the best thing? Absolutely. I think research pans out and plays that is true, but some of the bioidenticals can be safe and effective. And so again, don't necessarily disregard those should you need them. But again, how do you define whether or not you need them? That's where if you're working with your doctor and you're getting your levels measured. Because sometimes, even though estrogen gets blamed because of that Women's Health Initiative, estrogens can also combat cancer, and I think it's important to understand that too, because again, that Women's Health Initiative study gave all estrogen pretty much a bad rap, but some estrogens are very important to combat cancer. So there are research studies coming out now that show that low estrogen in women can actually increase your risk for developing cancer. So again, I think the difference between synthetic and potentially bioidentical is important to make that note. It's important to make that observation. But again, back to nutritional deficiencies, we're very sure that these nutrients, okay, are super important from a preventative perspective because they help your body properly metabolize estrogen into non-cancer versions of estrogen. And they also help antioxidant function, and they help different pathways to help control blood sugar that prevents the feeding of cancer. So again, very, very critical nutrients, and these are very common nutritional deficiencies as it relates to gluten sensitivity. As a matter of fact, you've probably heard me say this before, but zinc and vitamin D and B vitamins, particularly vitamin B12, in my experience, are the top. So D, B12, and zinc are 3 of the top 4 nutritional deficiencies that we find in individuals when they're first learning about gluten sensitivity. They're first finding out that they're gluten sensitive and they need to change their diet. I've done 21 years of research in this area of nutrition, and this is what we see most commonly: vitamin D, vitamin B12, and zinc that are on this list. Now, iron is another one that's very common, but there's not a whole lot of research linking low iron potentially to cancer in this way, not in breast cancer at least. So again, important to understand nutrients are very, very critical. Now, another topic I think that gets completely ignored in mainstream is the environmental risk linked to breast cancer. As a matter of fact, if you go to, I think it's American Cancer Society's website, and they talk about breast cancer, they say that the 2 factors associated with developing breast cancer, and this is, to me, it's like ridiculous, but this is what they say, is number 1, you have to be a woman. And although men can also develop breast cancer, obviously it's more common in women. And number 2 is age. The older you are, the greater the risk. Which in my opinion is ridiculous, because breast cancer is on this meteoric rise. It's been rising for the last 50 years. Outside of 2000, around that 2002 mark, when doctors really stopped using synthetic estrogens for fear of creating cancer, there was a dip in breast cancer for a few years at that time, but now the incidence continues to rise. And one of the reasons why, it's the topic that no one talks about. It's the environmental risks linked to breast cancer. So, for example, the garbage in sunscreen that they tell you, don't get skin cancer, lather up, right, with all these toxic compounds in your sunscreen, benzophenone 3, which is a carcinogenic compound in a lot of these products. And that's the doctor's advice, right? Avoid skin cancer, but slather up in something that increases your risk for breast cancer, right? And we also see a lot of this, the endocrine disrupting chemicals as well. And probably the most famous is BPA. The buzzword right now on the street, the healthy buzzword is BPA free. You keep seeing that, on the plastic water bottles. Now BPA free. Well, BPA is a class or a family of chemicals, BP or bisphenol, which is a type of chemical, and there's BPA, and there's BPB, and there's BPC. Well, they're only BPA free, but it's still plastic. It's still an endocrine disrupting battery of chemicals that are going to increase your risk for health issues. So, take it Quit drinking out of plastic. I know a lot of you carrying around your plastic water bottles everywhere you go. Stop it. It's one of the worst things that you can do is drink or eat off of or heat food up in or store food in plastics, because these chemicals are endocrine disrupting chemicals. Some of them mimic estrogen, and some of them interact with estrogen receptors and increase the risk for the development of cancer. So just stop doing it. It's a very easy lifestyle change to make. Another thing we see are high levels of triclosan. So this is ironic right now, is it doesn't matter where you go in the world, everybody is lathering their hands up in all these antibacterial, antiviral, liquids, right? Soaps and lotions. And matter of fact, right now, I just got off an airplane yesterday, traveling from Florida, and the first thing they do is they hand you this chemically loaded towel to wipe off your hands. And of course, it's got high levels of this substance, this triclosan, which is a known carcinogen. And so for the sake of protecting yourself from infection, they're telling you lather up in a carcinogen. It makes zero sense. And then we have chemicals that increase estradiol and progesterone synthesis, or we have other chemicals that are sprayed on. So let me give you examples of this. So this is like your pesticides, your herbicides, your fungicides, the stuff that's on your food, right? So if you're not eating organically, let me give you a reason to eat organically. If you're not eating organically, this is what you're getting. You're getting carcinogenic toxic compounds. One of them in particular is something called atrazine. Atrazine has been shown to upregulate estrogen receptors, and it's been linked to a number of major health issues. And so this is one of the most common, especially here in Texas. I know for a fact it's one of the most common sprays of broadleaf applications to knock out broadleaf weeds and other grasses. So it's not just atrazine either, it's things like glyphosate. So you've got a lot of different chemicals that can contribute to this. And one of the other ones we don't even have on here is cosmetics. Ladies, one of the reasons why the cancer is more prevalent in you, aside from the fact it's breast cancer, right, is the cosmetics. Men don't wear them typically, right? Men also, well, this isn't true, but also it's the aluminum antiperspirants that so many wear. These antiperspirants have aluminum, and one of the thoughts behind the aluminum is you wipe it into your armpit, that aluminum clogs into your pores and overwhelms your lymphatic fluid there, and it backs it up into the breast, contributing to an increased risk of cancer development. So we've got cosmetics, we've got antiperspirants, we've got pesticides, and again, we voluntarily lather ourselves up in this stuff. We put this on so that we don't sweat, and we drink out of BPA chemically loaded plastic water bottles as we eat food that's just doused in pesticides. And when we go outside, we lather up in sunscreen so that we don't get a sunburn and get skin cancer, but the sunscreen causes cancer. And then we wash our hands every 5 seconds because everybody's scared of a virus right now. We wash our hands in chemicals that actually cause cancer. So we have this milieu cocktail of carcinogens that we're exposing ourselves to on a daily basis. And when you combine that with the poor nutrition, right, the nutritional deficiencies that are there, and you combine that with a number of the different medications, estrogen-based medications, synthetics that women are taking, and you combine that too with other medications. So like the average person over the age of 45 in the United States is on 4 or more medications, and many of those medications cause vitamin and mineral deficiencies to destroy your GI tract, destroy your gut lining. And one of the newer realms of research right now is looking at this compound right here. It's called LPS. That stands for lipopolysaccharide. This is a bacterial toxin. And what does that have to do with cancer? Here's what we're learning. This is new science, but we see in guts, especially where people have taken a lot of antibiotics, or they're taking antacid medications or allergy medicines that destroy stomach acid, is they get an overgrowth of bacteria. So they get an overgrowth of bacteria, which increases bacterial toxin production. These toxins cause intestinal permeability or leaky gut. These toxins then travel to the liver, and they can really damage the liver in a very big way. And this is now being linked to liver cancers. Well, one of the risks of breast cancer is when the liver struggles, because a lot of your estrogen metabolism, a lot of the way that we metabolize these estrogens from being a cancer-causing estrogen to being an estrogen that the body can easily excrete is through the liver. So when the liver's struggling because it's being overburdened by bacterial endotoxins that are leaking across, and you drink, if you drink alcohol, now add alcohol to this mix, and then add all these other things, you can see how you would get a perfect storm. So our modern life, our modern society has really created a cocktail that's conducive to the development of cancer. And that's why we see this rising in breast cancer and not so much a reduction, is because these things are getting worse as each year goes on, not better. And people just aren't being taught. They're not being told. By the time you get the diagnosis, it's, hey, let's chop off your breasts. And it sounds a little brutal, but this is the reality. Let's chop off your breasts and then let's radiate you. And then, oh, by the way, for 5 more years after that, we'll put you on a drug called tamoxifen, which is the main drug post-breast cancer. And tamoxifen is a SERM. It's a selective estrogen receptor modulator. But it's linked to an increased risk for the development of autoimmune disease. So now we'll put you on a drug for 5 years that increases your risk for developing autoimmune disease. And of course, autoimmune disease progresses. As it progresses, autoimmunity actually, in many cases, becomes cancer. And so if you don't treat the reason the cancer came, the origin of why the cancer is there, the reason why it's developing, you're never going to win, because if you go that mainstream medical route, you're just going to get chopped on, you're going to get poisoned until it goes into remission. And then everybody celebrates remission as if it's a mega victory, when in reality there is no victory there. I would say if you didn't die, that's great. If you had a cancer that could be terminal and surgery and removal helped save your life, that's not what I'm saying, but we should be celebrating what we can do to prevent it. We shouldn't be celebrating the deformity and the mass surgical outcomes that we've basically normalized as a society, instead of having this other conversation that we've talked about tonight. So I think it's very important that you understand that. I think it's very important that you have that conversation with your loved ones, because if we don't have that conversation, it's never going to change, and we're just going to see more and more women go through this just horrific process of early detection, surgical removal, chemical manipulation, and then years of drug-induced autoimmune disease as kind of a backlash. And that's, to me, it's not a victory. We're not winning cancer. We're not erasing cancer in that way. The way we win is we identify where it's coming from and why it's happening, and we change our behaviors accordingly. And without those behavioral changes, nothing's ever going to happen to make this better. So I just don't want to see any of you go through that. Let's open it up to questions. So let's see, scroll up to the top on the right, Alan, on that. Yep, there you go. And move that timer out of my way too so I can see. There we go, perfect. My oncologist issued me an estrogen blocker. I have not taken it because my blood work says I'm producing less than 5 and the norm is greater than 69. I don't see the question in that. Her office won't return my call, so I need advice. I had a right breast mastectomy, no lymph gland tested, no chemo, no radiation, Hertz negative, 1 tumor, first stage, 3 tumors at stage 3. Jan, the best advice I really can give you is you need to find a doctor who deals with cancer, who understands that. There's a really great facility in Mexico, actually in Cancun. There's another one in Tijuana. One of them is called Hope for Cancer. Hope, the number 4, Cancer. And you can find their website. I think it's hopeforcancer.com. But Dr. Tony Jimenez is the doctor, and they do a very, very thorough and very, very good job. I'm personally not an oncologist, so I don't want to give you advice on what you should or shouldn't be doing, other than the diet and the lifestyle recommendations that we were talking about today, because you really got to have somebody look at that more meticulously in that direction. Dr. Osborne, I have a recent 3-centimeter adenomatoid lump and 2 smaller ones, which causes the tendency to grow lumps in waist. Ways to prevent, shrink them. Is chemo still recommended for cancer treatment? Again, I would say the same thing to you, Amelie. If you've got those, but one of the things that you should do is actually have your hormone levels tested. You should have your estrone, your estradiol, your estrione, and your progesterone. Those should all be like part of your workup that your doctor's running on you to help you understand how better your hormones can be balanced. Because I've seen some fibrocystic breast issues in women be largely associated with progesterone deficiency. And so, again, when you start getting a lump in your breast, a fibrocystic lump, a lot of women run in and get the mammogram, and then they get the scare, right? Because sometimes what happens to the mammogram is when they do the biopsy, they can damage the cells and it comes back inconclusive. And now you're sitting around waiting for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, just panicked in strict fear that you might have cancer. And that in and of itself, the fear creates such damage to women's mentality and to their immune system. Remember that heavy stress like that depletes your immune function and can allow for something to become worse. But adenoids, or not adenoids, fibroids in the breast tissue, in my experience, two things that we see a lot of, and one is progesterone deficiency, the other is iodine deficiency, can cause fibrocystic breast disease as well. Somebody's asking about metronidazole, which is an antiparasitic, while doing a gut cleanse. Generally speaking, yes, you can, but they're both cleansing your gut. Metronidazole typically cleans people out pretty well. Can nuclear medicine scan for the heart involving radioactive tracer injected intravenously into the arm cause breast cancer as the heart is under the left breast? I don't know that I've seen any research directly with causation, but we know radioactive material increases the risk for cancers because it creates mutagenesis in your cells, and that, whether it's a breast tissue or whether it's other tissue, there's definitely linkage to a lot of these radioactive tracers and dyes to mutagenesis. Can severe psoriasis on the breast cause breast cancer? I would say probably not the psoriasis itself that directly causes the breast cancer so much as the psoriasis is an autoimmune disease. And if you have it and you don't understand why, remember your immune system is, instead of protecting you from things like cancer cells, it's actually creating a reaction in your skin. So again, a lot of your resources are going toward attacking your own tissue and being moved away from protecting you from things like cancer. So indirectly, people that have an autoimmune process can, yes, definitely it can progress into different kinds of cancers. Let's see here. Keep going down. Let's see, for women who still have their menstrual period at 53, does it increase their risk for breast cancer even if they're fit and eat clean? No, not at all. Having a menstrual cycle doesn't increase your risk for breast cancer. I would say having a menstrual cycle healthfully into old age is probably a reduced risk for the development of cancer. Different requirements for states. California wants every 5 years if normal mammograms. In Oregon, they want every year, every 2 years if you complain. Yeah, that's where I just say what they want isn't as important as what you allow them to do. Your medical autonomy is critical, so make sure you protect it. I like that comment from Mark. Japanese women have far more iodine in their diet and have much less breast cancer than Americans. Yeah, because this again, going back to what I said about fibrocystic breast disease, iodine deficiency early shows up as cystic breast disease, and that's absolutely true. Japanese women have far greater reduction in occurrence of breast cancer. Now, one of the things you can do if you want to get more iodine in your diet is seaweed and seafood, which is missing from a lot of folks' diets. It's not highly emphasized, especially if you live in a non-coastal area where seafood is not fresh. Yeah, so the rate of black men having a higher rate of breast cancer contractability than white men has to actually, there's some studies showing that it has to do with vitamin D. The darker your skin, the harder it is for you to produce vitamin D, and this is why we see a kind of a prolific vitamin D deficiency in the African American population. And that, vitamin D doesn't just increase the risk for breast cancer; it increases the risk for high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, and 18 other forms of cancer. So it's very, very crucial to get your vitamin D. Let's see here. Yeah, so the question is that men who smoke have a higher risk of getting gynecomastia, which is actually growing breast tissue on their chest, feminine breast tissue on their chest. Does this increase the chance of getting breast cancer? It does. Gynecomastia is not a good thing, and oftentimes what happens in men is they lack the nutrients to convert testosterone properly, so their body starts driving the production of estrogen, and that can create part of that problem for men. Hyperestrogen production. Another big one that does that, we didn't really talk about, but I think it's worth mentioning, is certain mold metabolites. So fusarium, which is a type of common mold in water damaged buildings, produces a mycotoxin that mimics estrogen. It's an estrogen mimic. And I've seen cases where we see major problems associated with estrogen dominance in people with mycotoxin toxicity. And so again, fusarium, it's the name of the estrogen, or the name of the estrogen mimic, or the mycotoxin is called zearalenone, and it's another one that can mimic estrogen and create a serious problem in terms of your hormone balance. Connection between breast cancer and osteoporosis, estrogen, but not so much. Again, this goes back to what I said earlier, Dahlia, is that a lot of research is showing that not enough estrogen can actually contribute to breast cancer, just like not enough estrogen can also contribute to osteoporosis. But I think where medicine went wrong is the estrogens that they were giving for so many years to women were synthetic versions of estrogen that actually increased the risk of disease. And so, but some of these natural estrogens, we're not seeing that same correlation pan out. Barbara's asking on what we were talking about iodine earlier with breast issues, and that is, what's my opinion on taking iodine if you have Hashimoto's? I think it's fine. I think a lot of people have published that you shouldn't ever take iodine if you have Hashimoto's. I haven't found that to be true. Iodine I found to be safe with Hashimoto's. That means if Hashimoto's is, those of you who aren't familiar, that's when you're making antibodies against your own thyroid. Now, there is a caveat. I don't go, some therapeutic dose of iodine is about 50 milligrams a day. I wouldn't go that high in somebody that had Hashimoto's. I would probably stick to somewhere around that 12.5 milligram a day if there was an iodine deficiency. But remember, iodine's an essential nutrient, and if you're deficient in it, it can be very critical for your body to be able to maintain its function, including it has anti-cancer, anti-radioactive effects. Iodine, very important, obviously, for your thyroid hormone, the T4 and the T3 production. So I don't agree with some that say that iodine should not be taken if you have Hashimoto's, and I have not seen any clinical indication or contraindication, rather, for people that have Hashimoto's taking iodine, again, in that 12.5 milligram range. Is there a connection with celiac disease and chronic fungal disorders of the gut? Monica, there's a huge connection between celiac and fungal disorders of the gut. And I'm actually going to be flying to Nashville this weekend to talk about that very thing, doing an entire talk on the connection between chronic gluten exposure, feeding candida infection in the gut. But the two very much go hand in hand. And one of the things, too, is that candida, once you have an overgrowth, candida produces proteins that mimic gluten. So remember, gluten feeds the overgrowth of candida, then candida produces a protein that mimics gluten. So it's like a double whammy. Do you have to increase iodine gradually? Some people do, but the reason why they do is not because of Hashimoto's. So when we're talking about this 12.5, one of the biggest reasons why we see iodine creating an effect in individuals who have Hashimoto's has nothing to do with the iodine. It has more to do with a fluoride a bromine or a chlorine toxicity. Remember that combined, these three are also there. When you combine these with iodine, these three plus iodine fall in this family of elements called halides, and halides they have similar characteristics, so they compete with each other, right? And so these three, they will compete with iodine for uptake into your thyroid gland. So, if we're talking about T4, what is that for? The 4 is iodine, but if you have too much fluoride, bromine, or chlorine, they can replace iodine, and so your 4 in your T4 becomes maybe fluoride or bromine or chlorine. And so what happens when people have, and by the way, these halides displacing iodine from your thyroid hormone can help to trigger autoimmune thyroid disease. And so what happens is sometimes, I had somebody earlier today, their fluoride levels were triple the normal, right? I mean, they were so overfluoridated, it's fluorotoxicosis, and it was greatly affecting and impacting their thyroid, which was in turn affecting their muscles and their joints, because thyroid sets your metabolic rate. But a large part of it was because of the fluoride toxicity. And so a person like that, we give iodine. Part of what happens when you give iodine to somebody with fluoride toxicity, and this is true of bromine or chlorine toxicity, is you start pushing this stuff out. You push it out. So you detox. And so those reactions that people experience aren't iodine creating the problem. It's the pushing out of these other halides. And that, again, that can make a person symptomatic in the short term. So some people do better with a titration, meaning starting at lower levels of iodine and just slowly increasing incrementally. But if you're struggling with this, and your doctor hasn't measured your fluoride and your bromine, your halides and your iodine, like that's first step one, right? So that you have a good understanding of what's going on. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, so some of you are commenting, yeah, Dr. Ryan Cole, the pathologist who's looking a lot at cancer right now, is seeing a huge increase in cancer as a result of what's happening, and that's absolutely true. And I've heard that from a lot of my fellow colleagues in their clinical settings where people that had cancer, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they've been in remission for a really long time. We're seeing these cancers come roaring back. As a result of the disease that shall not be named treatment that many people are getting. Will taking sea salt and magnesium help? So taking sea salt, you're going to get minimal iodine from that. I would really recommend, instead of doing that, I recommend eating seafood and eating kelp. Kelp is a rich source of dietary iodine. Magnesium can help, but it's not going to help correct an iodine deficiency. Let's see. What's the connection between, I think I answered that one. What alternative is there for vitamin C if absorption is an issue? Heard niacin could be one. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that if you're not absorbing vitamin C, push more of it. Vitamin C will absorb through passive diffusion. If you get the gradient high enough in the GI tract, you're going to absorb it into the colon, or now from the colon and the intestine rather, into the bloodstream. So I've never seen the issue where somebody couldn't absorb vitamin C unless they were just full-blown Crohn's disease and couldn't retain anything, and they just had liquid bowels, and that was 20 liquid bowels a day or something like that. But that's a different scenario. Is the keto diet the cure for cancer? I don't think so. I think the keto diet starves cancers of sugar, and in that way it can be used as a very helpful tool for many people, but I don't know that it's necessarily the cure, because sugar is not the only trigger for cancer. Cancer has multiple triggers, as we've talked about tonight, and a keto diet is not going to cure the fact that somebody's rubbing pesticides or cosmetics or drinking plastics or eating off of plastics, etc. So, a keto diet doesn't solve for that. So keto diet can be helpful because sugar's a trigger, but again, not necessarily the solution. Let's see here. If one has been drinking Ozarka water in plastic jugs, how can we detox the BPA? It's a great question. I think one of the best things to detox those types of toxins out of you is to quit drinking them. That's step one. Step two is, remember, you have 4 primary pathways of detoxification. Pathway number 1 is through your poop, and pathway number 2 is through your urine. Number 3 is through your sweat. Number 4 is as you breathe. You actually breathe out toxins. So making sure those 4 pathways are turned on. A lot of times people get constipated, and so their gut detoxification is broken, or their liver's bogged down and they're not producing bile adequately. Bile is a toxin binder and can help get rid of toxins. And so their gut detoxification is broken for whatever various reasons. So, that's a whole probably weeks of conversation in and of itself. And then there's some people never exercise, so they never sweat. They never actually expel toxins through their skin because they never actually do enough physical exertion to create sweating. And this is where some people go in and they do like saunas, like infrared sauna, which can help. But those are passive therapies, and passive therapies, in my experience, don't work as well as active therapies. And active therapies where you do the work and not a machine or not something else doing the work. So in the case of exercise allows you to sweat, but exercise also pumps your lymphatic fluid and it mobilizes those toxins out of your body through your sweat. You can sit on your keister in infrared, but you're not mobilizing toxins that way. You are sweating, but you're not mobilizing through lymphatic. The other is practice deep breathing. A lot of people forget to breathe. They're at a computer desk, hunched over all day. They reduce their oxygen input and output, and that can pose a problem for detoxification as well. And then a lot of people don't get adequate hydration, and so they're not urinating frequently enough to rid their body of toxins. So again, we're just talking about general elimination. Those 4 pathways should be ramped up to the best of your ability if you're trying to get the BPA out of you. There are other things that you can do as well, certain types of antioxidants that can help with that. One of my favorite methods is vitamin C. Vitamin C is like human duct tape. It works on so many different aspects of physiology. And so vitamin C in higher doses to bowel tolerance is one of my favorite ways to help people do a generic type of detox. Again, the number 1 rule of any detox is that you're no longer being exposed to the toxin that you're trying to detox from. Once you're no longer being exposed, then you can implement detox strategies. So somebody said, I'm scared to knock over glass. I talk about drinking out of glass instead of plastic. Put it in a silicone wrap, right? Get you a glass water bottle that's wrapped in silicone. That way, if you knock it over, you don't have to worry about it breaking. I like that. Matthew Gibbs, just having some Warrior bread with slow-cooked grass-fed beef roast. Man, you're making me hungry. It's dinner time. Love that. Can you name some, let's see, go back up. Can you name some supplements that help to heal leaky gut and inflammation? It depends, Monica, on what's causing your leaky gut and inflammation. So, there are a lot of different supplements that can be helpful and supportive of the gut lining. I mean, I can give you some examples. L-glutamine is definitely one. Butyrate as a supplement can be very helpful for re-energizing the gut. There are other supplements like vitamin A can be very crucial for the recovery of gut cells and the turnover of gut cells. Zinc, very, very beneficial to the gut and also in producing digestive enzymes. And then you have probiotics. The probiotics are very important because if your leaky gut's being caused by bacterial imbalances, that probiotic can help restore some balance to the GI tract. So there's a whole host of things. What you might find helpful, Monica, if you don't already have it, is check out my guide to leaky gut. It's about an hour and a half long, and we do a real deep dive on everything leaky gut related. Do I recommend celery juice for any reason? Some people do celery juice every morning to have regular bowel movements. My question to those people, though, is what do you need celery juice to have a regular bowel movement for? If your bowels were working, you wouldn't have to drink celery juice. Is there anything wrong with drinking celery juice? Not necessarily, but one of the things that we know about over-juicing, especially using the same type of plant repetitively in mass quantities, and we see this with kale, we also see this with some of the other cruciferous, we see this with celery, is their ability to detox the soil of heavy metals. So if they're grown in a soil that contains things like lead or other heavy metals, then you can actually get exposure. I see this all the time in people that do heavy juicing, especially like with kale. We'll see thallium toxicities in them because thallium is a common metal found in organic farming soils. Lead can be too. Let's see, go down on that right side for me. Yes, a lot of questions about what do you wash your water bottles out with. One of the best things that you can do to wash them out is put them in the dishwasher, right? Put them in an actual dishwasher where that hot steam and soap can actually get to it and neutralize any kind of germs that might build up in it. I mean, that's a no-brainer on that one. I saw my GI for nausea and stomach bloating. He wants to do an upper and lower endoscopy along with a colonoscopy. What would you recommend? You know, you could do that. I don't really know that I could recommend something vastly different. I mean, it's pretty vague to say nausea and stomach bloating. I mean, there could be a lot of different things. But, you know, nausea and stomach bloating, for example, the upper GI might find H. pylori, which is a type of bacterial infection that can cause that type of issue, in which case an endoscopy might be very warranted for you. But it may not be anything. You know, you may do a GI and a GI series, upper and lower, and you may find nothing, in which case then it would be more investigation, in my opinion. So it's just really hard to give you, you know, a solid there. I would say start with food. A lot of times people's nausea and stomach bloating is what you put in your mouth, right? And so an endoscopy and a lower GI are not going to solve that. I take don't construe this as medical advice, but I take kind of a off approach to GI uppers and lowers. And the reason why is they're running a fiber optic camera in you. And so what you're relying on is you're relying on the person whose job it was to clean those instruments. Maybe that person had a bad day today. And most people that go to a GI doctor have really sick problems in their GI tract. A lot of them have infection, bacterial issues. So when they run those scopes up them, you know, basically they're inoculated. Those cameras and those tubes are being inoculated by abnormal bacteria from sick people. Well, if the person whose job it was to clean that material or to clean that equipment very, very well was having a bad day, to me, you run a great risk. That's why before you can do an upper or lower GI, you actually have to sign this multi-page waiver stating that you understand the risks of doing that procedure. So I would always say, you know, it's not a bad idea to just talk to the doctor and talk about all those risks, and that way you can make a better decision for yourself. The difference between regular and plant-based chemo, what you may be referring to is that like the chemo that you might get in a hospital, those are very, very caustic and toxic drugs, whereas plant-based chemo, you might be doing like, some people use like apricot kernels because there's different substances in that material that actually have chemotherapeutic effects. And so a lot of people go that natural route. And if that's what you're referring to as natural chemo, again, I'm not certain what you're asking me. Let's see, what's the best supplement? That's pretty general, Kay. The best supplement to heal with, I mean, if you're just starting with just what could you take, a good supplement to take is a really solid multivitamin. I'm partial to my own formulations. You know, my favorite is something called Ultra Nutrients, which is a formula that I designed specifically, you know, based on years and years of clinical research and practice. And that's the best place to start. If you're just talking about a broad spectrum, good quality multivitamin, multimineral. Now, if you're talking about other supplements for helping your body recover and heal, you've got to really get more specific because it just depends on, because the best one depends on what the person's low in. I mean, I've seen people with low vitamin D, and for them, vitamin D was very helpful. I've seen people low in zinc, and for them, zinc was very helpful. Where on the contrary, I've seen people that weren't low in zinc, and so they were taking zinc, and it wasn't very helpful. So again, it just depends on what you're low in. How do you detox the radiation from the body? Well, one of the best ways to detox radiation, in my opinion, is iodine, is using iodine. It's very, very effective at neutralizing radiation. And also eating well and having a great plethora of antioxidants in your diet. Because again, how does your body defend itself from all forms of damage? It starts with the right food. There was actually years ago, I went to the Space Congress conference, and scientists from NASA were talking about their research discoveries in the space station, and they were subjecting mice to radioactive ionizing radiation. And, again, these mice were getting cancer, were getting tumors, but when they fed the mice antioxidant-rich blueberries and raspberries, their cancer diminished, and the ones that were fed cancer before being exposed to radiation did not develop cancer. And so again, don't underestimate the power of food. It's full of rich in antioxidants, just like that photopigment in a blueberry or in a raspberry protects that fruit from dehydrating on the vine in the 100-degree weather in the hot sun. It protects you from radiation. That protection transfers to you when you eat them. So food can be very, very critical. Don't forget about food. So supplements to support women diagnosed with breast cancer, I think that's a great question, and I think it depends on what angle you're taking to treat your breast cancer. Because if you're going the realm of chemo, or if you're going the realm of radiation, my advice is going to change. But as a general rule, and this will probably, your oncologist will probably say, that Dr. Osborne doesn't know what he's talking about, and you should never take antioxidants when you're being treated for cancer. I don't agree with that. Regardless, I think if you're just looking at some good quality support overall, if you're on any kind of chemo, you need to be on high doses of B vitamins. Remember, chemo depletes B vitamins and can destroy your gut lining, and it can really cause a lot of malnutrition. So keeping your B12, especially in your folate levels, high during that type of therapy can help preserve your GI tract function and lining and absorption. If you're on any kind of radiative therapies, you have to look at, and it depends on the length of time that you're on it, depends on the location where you're getting it. But there are it's really hard to answer that because there are certain strategies that you want to implement, but a lot of those strategies are dependent upon the uniqueness of the individual. And I would say if you've got cancer and you're trying to figure out what to supplement with, don't mess around with guessing, because you're going to do yourself a huge detriment by trying to guess your way right. I've seen it all the time in my practice where when we test versus when we guess, the outcomes are always better. And so what I would recommend is what a person needs versus just speculative, hey, take these 5 things. Let's see, my young 37-year-old doctor died of breast cancer in July. I'm so heartbroken. She had plant chemo and surgery. I was shocked how fast it was. Yeah, that's sad. That's very, very sad. Is surgery the only way to unblock the iliac artery without stenosis? That's a very challenging question to ask, and not one I can really answer, because I'm not privy to your image. I'm not privy to the level of blockage. I'm not privy to the other arteries that branch off from that. So there's too much to unpack there. Hello, I have gluten sensitivity. What's the worst for us? Gluten, sugar, or dairy? Pick your poison, Chris. They're all bad. But if you're gluten sensitive, obviously you don't want to eat gluten. Sugar's not going to do you any favors. And dairy, depending on what kind of dairy it is, most dairies mimic gluten, so that's not going to do you any favors either if you're gluten sensitive. Cruciferous vegetables give me constipation even when cooked. Yeah, a lot of people don't do well with cruciferous, and cruciferous are very medicinal for some and very anti-medicinal for others. So this is why we're so unique. This is why not one size fits all. Let's see. How do you deal with the soil? I don't know what you're referring to, Kathleen, the V in the soil. Be more specific so I can understand what you're talking about. Does dense breast tissue with several cysts pose a higher risk for breast cancer? My doctor wants me to rescan in 6 months, and I'm concerned for increased radiation. That's a really great question. Not necessarily. I would figure out why you have the dense breast tissue with cysts. I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, progesterone deficiency, iodine deficiency, magnesium deficiency, all can be causes of dense fibrocystic breast tissue. Fatty acid deficiency can contribute to that. So, I mean, get tested nutritionally, I would say, first and foremost. If you're concerned about ongoing radiation, by rechecking it periodically, ask your doctor about using thermography instead. Thermography is non-radiative, so it's a way to detect heat signatures in your breast. And sometimes when there's a high levels of density on a thermography scan, it can be indicative that you need to have it further investigated, but it's one way to try to help you without exposing yourself to the radiation. But I would look into nutrients, and I would also talk to your doctor about a mammography or about a thermography instead. Question, if I am gluten sensitive but do not have celiac, can I have some deficiency with the sensitivity? Absolutely. If you're talking about nutritional deficiency, it's very common. Can a normal gluten gene mutate from poor diet? No. Your genes, so what you have in terms of your genetics are not going to mutate unless you're talking about exposing yourself to some severe radiation, but your genes are not necessarily going to mutate from a poor diet. Now, your genetic behavior, so the behavior of the genes that you have will ramp up or ramp down based on your behaviors, and that's what happens with gluten genes. If you have them and you expose them to gluten, then they turn on and turn up, and the outcome is inflammatory reactions that can damage your tissue. Let's see. Given that B12, folate, and B6 are required to metabolize estrogens, is high homocysteine correlated with breast cancer? Yes, high homocysteine is definitely correlated with cancer. Homocysteine elevation is correlated with a lot of disease. It's correlated with cancer. It's correlated with stroke and heart attack and diabetes and osteoporosis. Again, it's an inflammatory metabolite. We all produce it, but without B vitamins, we can't recycle it or get rid of it. We also can't generate methionine properly with it, which is a primary methylator, and that we're talking about methylating your different estrogens is a very important process of naturally getting rid of or detoxifying estrogens that can be detrimental. All right, I think we're out of time. I'm hungry. Matthew made me hungry with that warrior bread and roast beef, so I think I'm going to go home and eat. Look, thanks for spending your Monday evening with me. If you're new to the show and you need more, you want to get more, make sure you come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. The only way I can prevent censorship from my information from not reaching you is for you to sign up for my newsletter, because all other mediums of social media that we're involved in are rapidly and constantly censoring our information, just like you saw tonight where the feed went blank for a while. Like we're struggling with these kinds of issues all the time. So if you want to make sure you stay abreast of this information, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. And make sure you share this with somebody that you love. Look, our goal here is to save 100 million lives. So don't be stingy with this information. Get it out there. If you know somebody struggling with breast cancer, if you know somebody who's just got questions about it and needs more information about how to navigate diet and lifestyle to be more preventative, make sure you share this, because together we can help more people, and that's really what it's all about. So we'll see you next Monday night for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Wish you excellent health. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent